A single chess move played by trembling hands in a gilded ballroom was enough to bring a titan of industry to his knees. Victor Ashford, a man whose net worth could fund small nations, a man who had crushed competitors and built empires before lunch, found himself unable to breathe. The woman across the board wasn't a grandmaster or a prodigy, she was his housemaid, her uniform still bearing the scent of lemon polish. But it wasn't her victory that shattered him. It was the way she moved the pieces, a signature style he hadn't seen in 15 years, a style that belonged to someone he destroyed. Why did this mogul who had everything collapse at the sight of a woman playing chess the way his former partner once did? The answer lies in a tale of betrayal, a brilliant mind erased from history, and a heart that had been frozen for over a decade, until one impossible game changed everything. The Ashford Manor stood like a crown jewel on the hills overlooking Silverton Bay, a sprawling estate that had been featured in Architectural Digest 3 times. Tonight, every window blazed with light, and a procession of luxury vehicles snaked up the mile-long driveway, disgorging Silicon Valley royalty, Wall Street titans, Hollywood producers, and politicians whose names appeared regularly in national headlines. This was the 15th annual Ashford Foundation Gala, an event that had become legendary not for its charitable donations, though those were substantial, but for its host's theatrical displays of wealth and power. Victor Ashford didn't just throw parties, he staged demonstrations of dominance. Inside the grand ballroom, beneath a Murano glass chandelier that had cost more than most people would earn in a lifetime, Victor Ashford held court. At 53, he cut an imposing figure, 6 feet 2 inches of tailored perfection, with steel-gray hair swept back from a face that could have been carved from marble. His eyes, the color of winter storm clouds, missed nothing. He wore a midnight blue Tom Ford suit that had been custom-fitted in Milan, and on his wrist gleamed a Patek Philippe watch worth enough to pay for a 4-year college education. Victor Ashford was the founder and CEO of Ashford Analytics, a data science company that had revolutionized predictive modeling across industries from finance to healthcare. His personal fortune was estimated at $12 billion. Forbes had called him the Oracle of Silicon Valley. He sat on the boards of 3 Fortune 500 companies and had the personal phone numbers of senators and prime ministers. And he was utterly, completely bored. The evening had proceeded exactly as planned, cocktails at 7, dinner at 8, speeches at 9. Now, at 10:30, it was time for what had become the signature event of these galas, Victor's Chess Challenge. A platform had been erected in the center of the ballroom, and atop it sat an antique chess set that had once belonged to a Russian Grand Duke. The pieces were carved from ivory and ebony, each one a miniature work of art. Beside the board stood Gregor Petrosian, a 64-year-old Armenian grandmaster with a FIDE rating of 2,687 and a personality that could curdle milk. Victor ascended the platform steps with the easy grace of a man accustomed to being the center of attention. The crowd hushed immediately. He didn't need to tap a microphone or call for quiet, his mere presence commanded it. "Ladies and gentlemen," Victor began, his voice a rich baritone that carried effortlessly through the cavernous space, "as many of you know, I'm a man who appreciates a good challenge. I'm also a man who appreciates the beautiful simplicity of absolute truth. In chess, unlike in business or politics, there are no excuses. You either win, or you lose." Appreciative chuckles rippled through the audience. "Tonight, I'm offering $75 million, he paused, letting the staggering sum sink in. "To anyone in this room who can defeat my personal chess consultant, Grandmaster Gregor Petrosian, in a single game." The crowd erupted in excited murmurs. 75 million. It was an absurd amount, even for a room where the combined net worth exceeded several $100 billion. "Of course," Victor continued, and now his smile took on a predatory edge, "I should mention that Gregor has played in 12 World Championship matches and has never lost to an amateur in his entire professional career. So please, by all means," he gestured to the board with mock generosity, "step up and claim your fortune." What followed was a parade of humiliation. First came Brandon Chen, a venture capitalist who'd won his college chess championship 20 years ago. He lasted 19 moves. Next was Senator Patricia Whitmore, who managed 23 moves before her classical opening was dissected with surgical precision. Then came Marcus Wellington III, heir to a pharmaceutical fortune and an actual titled expert with a rating of 2,100. He lasted 41 moves, but ultimately Gregor's endgame technique proved insurmountable. Victor watched each defeat with barely concealed satisfaction, sipping a 30-year-old Macallan and making sardonic comments that drew laughter from the crowd. This wasn't about charity or entertainment, it was about establishing hierarchy, about reminding everyone that Victor Ashford operated on a level they couldn't reach. By 11:15, 7 challengers had been systematically destroyed. The crowd's enthusiasm was waning. Victor was about to declare the challenge closed when a voice cut through the murmuring. "Excuse me. I would like to try." The accent was Eastern European, Slavic, possibly Russian or Ukrainian. The voice was female, quiet but clear. The crowd turned as one. She stood near the service entrance, wearing the simple black dress and white apron uniform of the household staff. Her name tag read, Elena. The crowd's reaction was instantaneous, shocked gasps and nervous laughter. This wasn't just an amateur challenging a grandmaster. This was a maid. The help. Victor's expression flickered through surprise, confusion, and annoyance. "I'm sorry, but this challenge is for guests of the gala." The announcement said anyone in this room, Elena interrupted calmly. "I am in this room. Unless your word means nothing?" A collective intake of breath. No one spoke to Victor Ashford like that. Victor's eyes narrowed. But 300 pairs of eyes were watching, many holding phones. If he backed down, he would look weak. "Very well," he said, his voice taking on a dangerous edge. "Though I should inform you that when you lose, and you will lose, you'll be looking for new employment." "And when I win?" Elena asked, climbing the steps with steady, measured steps. Victor's laugh was sharp. "If by some miracle you win, the 75 million is yours. Though I'd suggest you have better odds buying lottery tickets." Elena reached the board and sat across from Gregor, who looked at her with pity and contempt. Up close, Victor could see her more clearly, early 30s, dark brown hair in a practical bun, olive skin, high cheekbones. Her hands trembled slightly as she touched the white queen after winning the coin toss. "Your move," Gregor said curtly. Elena moved her king's pawn forward 2 squares. E4. The most common opening. Gregor responded with the Sicilian defense. The game had begun. For the first 7 or 8 moves, everything proceeded as expected. Gregor played with aggressive efficiency. Elena's responses were solid but unremarkable, the moves of someone who knew the rules but lacked real depth. Victor returned to his whiskey, already bored. This would be over in 15 moves. He began chatting with a CEO about a potential acquisition, only half watching. Then something changed. On move 12, Elena made a knight sacrifice that looked completely insane, throwing away a piece for no apparent compensation. Gregor paused, his hand hovering over the board, searching for a trap. Finding none, he captured the knight. But 3 moves later, the position transformed. Elena's remaining pieces suddenly coordinated with devastating efficiency. Her bishop and rook created a battery aimed at Gregor's king. Her queen swung to the kingside. Her remaining knight leaped to a square that simultaneously attacked 2 pieces while supporting her bishop. It wasn't just good chess. It was beautiful chess. The pieces moved with fluid grace, like a choreographed dance. Victor stopped mid-sentence. His eyes fixed on the board. The ballroom had gone quiet. Gregor's confident expression had vanished. He was leaning forward, studying the position with intensity, his clock running down faster than Elena's. She was playing quickly, instinctively, while he burned minutes searching for defensive resources. On move 23, Elena sacrificed her second knight. The crowd gasped. Now she was down 2 full pieces, a material disadvantage that should be completely losing. And that's when Victor Ashford felt his heart skip a beat. Because he'd seen this pattern before. Not this exact game, but this style, this fearless, artistic approach that treated the board like a canvas. This willingness to sacrifice material for position, to prioritize beauty over efficiency. He'd seen it 15 years ago, in a cramped apartment in Cambridge, Massachusetts, where a brilliant young immigrant from Belarus had taught him the game between marathon coding sessions. Victor's hand trembled so badly that whiskey sloshed over the rim. His eyes weren't on the board anymore, they were on Elena's hands, watching how she touched the pieces. The same gentle, reverent way. The thoughtful head tilt. The slight smile when she saw a combination. It was impossible. It couldn't be. The game continued with ruthless momentum. Elena's attack was a symphony. Her bishop, rooks, and queen wove through Gregor's defenses like water through cracks in stone. The grandmaster was in full retreat, his king fleeing from square to square. Move 34. Elena's rook slid across the board. Check, she said quietly. Gregor's king moved. Elena's queen swooped down. Check. The king moved again. Elena's bishop adjusted. Check. A mating net, tightening with each move. The crowd was on its feet. Some guests were filming on their phones. Move 37. Elena moved her queen one final time, placing it on a square protected by her rook. Checkmate, she said softly. For 3 full seconds, no one moved. No one spoke. Then the room exploded. Applause erupted like thunder. Guests were shouting, laughing, embracing each other. A maid had just defeated a world-class grandmaster for $75 million. Gregor sat motionless, staring at the board as if it had betrayed him. His face had gone gray. But Victor wasn't looking at Gregor. He was staring at Elena with absolute horror. His face had drained of all color. His breathing had become shallow. His hands gripped the chair arms so tightly his knuckles turned white. Elena stood. In the chaos of applause, she turned to face Victor directly. Their eyes met. And in that moment, with the noise fading to a distant roar in Victor's ears, Elena spoke quietly, but he heard every word with perfect clarity. That was for Mikhail. The name struck Victor like a physical blow. His vision blurred. The room tilted. He stood abruptly, knocking over his glass, and without a word, not to the guests, not to his staff, not even to acknowledge Elena, he turned and walked out. He fled. Behind him, the celebration continued, but Victor heard none of it. He heard only a name he hadn't spoken aloud in 15 years, echoing like an accusation, like a ghost demanding acknowledgement, like the past finally catching up. Mikhail. The ghost returns. Victor's private study was in the east wing, accessible only through a locked door. He stumbled in and collapsed into his leather chair, his usual grace abandoned. His hands shook violently. He poured 3 fingers of Macallan with trembling hands, splashing liquid onto the mahogany. He downed it in one burning gulp, then immediately poured another. Mikhail. The name was a key turning in a lock he'd welded shut 15 years ago. Now the door was opening, and everything he'd buried was flooding back. Mikhail Volkov. They'd met in fall 2008, both graduate students at MIT. Victor pursuing an MBA, already seeing himself as a future captain of industry. Mikhail finishing a PhD in computer science, specializing in machine learning and predictive algorithms. They'd been introduced at a campus coffee shop. Victor remembered that first meeting vividly. Mikhail had been exactly the type he usually dismissed. Too idealistic, too theoretical, too concerned with elegance over commercial viability. But Mikhail had possessed something Victor lacked, genuine, undeniable genius. Over coffee, Mikhail had sketched an idea on a napkin, a revolutionary approach to predictive modeling that could analyze seemingly unrelated data streams and identify patterns traditional algorithms missed. This could be worth millions, Victor had said. Mikhail had laughed. Maybe. But that's not why it's interesting. It could help people. Medical diagnosis, climate modeling, disaster prediction, imagine what we could do. Victor had smiled and said all the right things about changing the world. But in his mind, he'd been calculating market size and valuations. They'd formed a partnership, DA Analytics, named with their initials reversed because Mikhail insisted Victor's business skills were equally important. They'd worked from Mikhail's cramped apartment near Central Square, surviving on ramen and coffee, coding until dawn, dreaming. During breaks from screens, Mikhail would pull out his travel chess set. "My grandfather taught me in Minsk," he'd explained. "He said chess teaches you to see consequences before they happen. Good skill for life, yes?" Mikhail had taught Victor to play. More than that, he'd taught him to appreciate the game as art, not just competition. Mikhail played with fearless creativity, sacrificing pieces for position, finding beautiful combinations. "Chess is not war, Victor," he'd said during one game, after sacrificing his queen for a devastating attack. "It is ballet. You must make the board dance." The algorithm they developed was brilliant. By early 2010, they had a working prototype producing results that seemed almost magical. That's when the trouble started. Victor had been shopping the technology to VCs, looking for funding to scale. Interest was immediate and intense. But the VCs had concerns, specifically about Mikhail's insistence on ethical controls. Mikhail wanted to restrict military applications, refuse certain clients, maintain open-source elements for academic researchers. He talked constantly about responsibility to humanity. The investors hated it. They told Victor privately that Mikhail was an obstacle, that his idealism would kill the company. And Victor, who had grown up working class in Manchester watching his father struggle, who had come to America with dreams of building an empire, Victor had listened. The betrayal was methodical and calculated. Victor consulted lawyers specializing in immigration and partnership disputes. He discovered Mikhail's visa status was precarious. There were technicalities, documentation issues, vulnerabilities. Working with Harrison Blackwood from Blackwood Ventures, a man who made his fortune stripping companies, Victor restructured the partnership agreements. He buried clauses in legal jargon that Mikhail, brilliant with algorithms but naive about business, signed without understanding. Then came the betrayal itself. Victor called an emergency board meeting. He presented fabricated evidence that Mikhail had been working on competing technology, negotiating with rivals, and that his visa status made him a legal liability. The vote was 3-1. Mikhail was removed. His shares were bought out at a fraction of their value. Then Victor reported the visa issues to immigration authorities. Mikhail was deported within 6 weeks. Victor remembered their last conversation before Mikhail's flight from Logan Airport. They'd met at a coffee shop. Mikhail had looked hollow, betrayed beyond business. "I thought we were friends," Mikhail had said quietly. "I thought we were building something good together." "Business isn't about friendship," Victor had replied, harder than intended. "It's about survival. You were going to kill the company with your idealism. I did what I had to do." "No," Mikhail had said, standing to leave. "You did what you wanted to do. You chose this, Victor. And you'll have to live with that choice." Those were the last words Mikhail ever spoke to him. Victor told himself it was necessary. That Mikhail would land on his feet, find another opportunity, eventually understand. He'd renamed the company Ashford Analytics. He'd taken their algorithm and filed all patents in his name alone. He'd removed Mikhail's name from technical papers and presentations. He'd erased him from history. The technology was worth millions. Then tens of millions. Then hundreds of millions. Within 5 years, Ashford Analytics was valued at over $2 billion. Victor became exactly what he'd dreamed: rich, powerful, celebrated. But he'd never forgotten Mikhail. And he'd never forgiven himself. 3 years after deportation, he'd hired investigators. The news was devastating. Mikhail had returned to Belarus to find the political situation worse. His activism had marked him. He couldn't work in his field. Couldn't publish. Couldn't teach. He'd worked as a translator, then a tutor. He'd lived in a one-room apartment in Minsk. Then, according to the report, he'd died of a heart attack at 37. The investigator included one final detail: Mikhail had been teaching chess to neighborhood children before his death. The kids said he'd been happier, that he'd told them he was finally at peace with his past. Victor had read that report and felt something break inside. Not just guilt, he'd been living with that. This was deeper. The realization that the man he'd destroyed had found peace while Victor, with all his wealth, had found only emptiness. For 15 years, Victor had carried that knowledge. He'd built his empire on stolen foundations. He'd achieved everything and found it hollow. He'd tried therapy, philanthropy, meditation, nothing filled the void. He'd become exactly what Mikhail had warned against: successful but soulless. And now, impossibly, someone had walked into his home, played chess in Mikhail's exact style, and spoken Mikhail's name. As if the ghost of his greatest sin had taken form to demand accounting. Victor sat in his study, his second glass untouched, and for the first time in 15 years, he allowed himself to fully feel the weight of what he'd done. He wept. The reckoning begins. In the servants' quarters, Elena Volkov sat on her narrow bed, mind racing. She'd done it. She'd actually done it. Other staff had erupted in celebration, but Elena had retreated, needing space to process. Through thin walls, she heard excited chatter, speculation about 75 million, wonder at her chess skill, theories about what she'd do with the money. But Elena felt no joy. Only hollow completion, mixed with something else. Regret? Doubt? She looked around her small room, 8 by 10 feet, containing a single bed, small desk, chair, and narrow closet. This had been home for 6 months. Before, a shared apartment with 3 immigrant women. Before that, a youth hostel in Boston. Before that, a cramped flat in Minsk with her mother and younger brother. Elena had been born in Belarus to parents who'd been academics before politics made such positions untenable. Her father was a mathematician, her mother taught literature. When Elena was 5, her uncle Mikhail had left for America, promising to bring the family once established. He'd sent money regularly, letters full of excitement about his work, his brilliant partner Victor, the company that would change the world. Then the letters stopped. Her mother Nadia tried to find out what happened. Eventually they learned Mikhail had been deported, returned to Belarus disgraced and broken. He'd lived with them 3 years before his death, 3 years that marked young Elena. Mikhail had been a shadow of the man in those letters. He rarely smiled. Worked menial jobs. But in evenings, teaching Elena chess, some spark returned. "Your move should tell a story," he'd say. "Each piece is a character. They must work together. It's not about killing the enemy's king, it's about creating something beautiful." He'd taught her his style, fearless sacrifices, creative combinations, elegance over efficiency. And he'd told stories about America, his work, the partner who betrayed him. Victor, he'd say, the name laden with complex emotion, anger, sadness, and something like residual affection. He was brilliant in his way. Saw opportunities no one else saw. But he was so afraid, of being poor, of being nothing. That fear made him cruel. Mikhail died when Elena was 15. His last words to her mother were about forgiveness, letting go of anger, how hatred was poison. But his last words to Elena were different. "If you ever go to America," he'd whispered, holding her hand from his hospital bed, "if you ever meet Victor Ashford, I want you to play chess with him. Play my way. Let him see what he destroyed. Not for revenge," he squeezed her hand. "But so he remembers that I was real. That we were real. That what we built together was real. He's spent years trying to forget. Don't let him." Elena had promised. And spent 10 years making herself into someone who could keep it. She'd studied English obsessively. Worked and saved. Applied for immigration programs, facing rejection after rejection. Finally, at 25, she'd received a work visa through a hospitality program. She'd come to America with $700, a suitcase, and a travel chess set that belonged to her uncle. 5 years she'd worked, cleaning houses, waiting tables, scrubbing floors. Sent money home. Learned American customs, English, chess notation. And researched Victor Ashford obsessively. 6 months ago, seeing a job posting for Ashford Manor housekeeping staff, she'd known it was time. She'd prepared for this moment, practiced the game, planned her approach, steeled herself. She'd anticipated his shock, denial, perhaps anger. What she hadn't anticipated was the look on his face when she'd said Mikhail's name. Not just shock. Not just recognition. Devastation. The face of a man living with a wound that had never healed, suddenly ripped open. Elena had expected satisfaction. Vindication. Justice. Instead, she'd felt pity. A knock interrupted her thoughts. "Elena? Are you awake?" Margaret Chen, the head housekeeper. "Someone's here to see you. From Mr. Ashford's legal team. She says it's urgent." Elena opened the door. Standing in the hallway was a woman in her mid-40s, impeccably dressed in charcoal gray, carrying a leather briefcase. Professional expression, sharp assessing eyes. "Miss Volkov, my name is Catherine Reed. I'm chief legal counsel for Mr. Ashford. May we speak privately?" Elena nodded, stepping aside. Catherine looked around the cramped space with an expression suggesting rapid reassessment. "First," Catherine said, "congratulations. That was quite a game. Second, Mr. Ashford intends to honor his commitment. 75 million will be transferred within 48 hours. Elena nodded slowly. "And third?" Catherine's lips quirked, acknowledging Elena's perceptiveness. "And third, Mr. Ashford has requested a private meeting tomorrow morning. He would very much like to speak with you about how you learned to play chess." "I bet he would," Elena said quietly. Catherine's expression shifted, becoming less lawyerly. "Miss Volkov, I've worked for Victor Ashford 12 years. I've seen him negotiate billion-dollar deals without breaking a sweat. Fire executives without emotion. Address shareholders, dominate boardrooms, dismantle competitors." She paused. "I've never seen him run from anything. Until tonight. And I've certainly never seen him cry." Elena's head snapped up. "What?" "Whatever you said, whatever that name meant, it broke something in him. Or maybe it broke something already broken." Catherine pulled a business card from her pocket. "The meeting is 10 a.m. tomorrow at his downtown office. You don't have to come. You've won your money. You could walk away." "But?" Elena prompted. "But I think you came here for more than money," Catherine said, meeting Elena's eyes. "And I think he knows that. Whatever this is about, I don't think either of you will find peace until you finish it." After Catherine left, Elena sat on her bed, staring at the business card. She thought about her uncle's last words, about promises made and kept, about revenge and forgiveness, about ghosts demanding acknowledgement. Tomorrow, she would face Victor Ashford again. Not across a chessboard this time. Face to face, with no crowds, no games, just two people connected by a ghost and a truth buried for far too long. Elena lay down, mind spinning through possibilities, wondering what version of Victor Ashford she would meet tomorrow, the titan of industry, or the broken man who had fled his own party. She suspected neither. She suspected she would meet the real Victor Ashford for the first time, stripped of his armor, forced to confront the past he'd spent 15 years running from. And she had no idea if she was ready for that conversation. The Ashford Tower pierced the Silverton-based skyline like a glass dagger, 73 stories of steel and ambition with Victor's name etched in letters 3 feet tall at the entrance. Elena stood on the sidewalk at 9:45 in the morning, staring up at the building that her uncle's genius had helped create, and felt her resolve waver. She could walk away. The money would be transferred regardless. She'd kept her promise to Mikhail, she'd made Victor remember. She'd seen his face shatter at the mention of that name. Wasn't that enough? But her uncle's final words echoed, "Let him see what he destroyed. So he remembers that I was real." Elena straightened her shoulders and walked through the revolving doors. Catherine Reed met her in the lobby, looking even more severe in daylight. She wore a navy suit that probably cost more than Elena had earned in 6 months of housekeeping. But her eyes held something unexpected: concern, perhaps even compassion. "He's been here since 6 this morning," Catherine said as they rode the elevator to the penthouse level. "I don't think he slept at all. Miss Volkov, whatever you're planning to say to him, please understand, Victor Ashford is many things, most of them not particularly admirable. But the man you're about to meet is not the same man who walked out of that ballroom last night. Something in him has broken. Or maybe something that was always broken has finally been acknowledged." The elevator doors opened directly into Victor's office, a corner suite with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, the bay, and the mountains beyond. It was a view that proclaimed dominance, a visual representation of a man who'd conquered everything. But the man sitting behind the massive mahogany desk looked like he'd been conquered instead. Victor Ashford had aged a decade overnight. His perfectly styled hair was disheveled, his shirt wrinkled, his tie loosened. His eyes were bloodshot and hollow. On his desk sat an open bottle of scotch, barely touched, and a photograph Elena recognized even from across the room. 2 young men with their arms around each other, grinning at the camera. One was clearly a younger Victor. The other was unmistakably Mikhail. "Leave us, Catherine," Victor said without looking up. His voice was hoarse, scraped raw. Catherine hesitated, glanced at Elena, then nodded and left, closing the door with a soft click. For a long moment, neither spoke. Elena remained standing near the door, studying the man who'd haunted her family's stories for 15 years. Victor stared at the photograph, his fingers tracing its edges with something like reverence. "I know who you are," Victor finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I spent all night researching. Elena Volkov, age 32, born in Minsk. Daughter of Nadia Volkov, who was Mikhail's younger sister. You were 5 years old when he left for America. 15 when he died." He looked up, and his eyes were swimming with unshed tears. "He used to talk about you. He called you his little chess prodigy. He said you had your grandmother's eyes and your grandfather's strategic mind." Elena's breath caught. She hadn't expected this, hadn't expected him to have known about her at all. "He showed me a picture once," Victor continued, pulling open his desk drawer. He removed a faded photograph and slid it across the desk. He kept it in his wallet. "Is this you?" Elena approached slowly and picked up the photograph. It showed a young girl, maybe 7 or 8, sitting at a chessboard with intense concentration. Mikhail was beside her, pointing at the board, his face animated with joy. "I don't remember this being taken," Elena whispered, her fingers trembling. "He was so proud of you," Victor said, and now the tears were falling freely down his face. "He used to tell me that when the company succeeded, the first thing he'd do was bring his family to America. He'd already picked out a house in Cambridge near good schools. He had the whole future planned: you'd study mathematics or computer science, maybe work with us someday. He said you were going to change the world." Elena felt her own tears starting, hot and angry. "And instead, he died in a 1-room apartment, tutoring chess to pay for food. That was the future you gave him." "I know," Victor said, his voice breaking completely. "I know what I did. I've known for 15 years. Every success, every dollar, every accolade, it's all been poisoned by what I did to him. To you. To your family." He stood on shaky legs and walked to the window, staring out at the empire he'd built on stolen foundations. "Do you know what the worst part is? It's not the guilt, though that's been eating me alive. It's that I can't even claim I had no choice. I did have a choice. Every step of the way, I had a choice. And I chose ambition over friendship. I chose wealth over integrity. I chose to become a monster because I was too cowardly to risk failure." The confession. Elena moved closer, her anger warring with something else, a reluctant understanding of the prison Victor had built for himself. "Why did you do it? Really? Not the business justifications, the real reason. Victor turned from the window, and in his ravaged face, Elena saw not the titan of industry but a broken man desperate for absolution. Because I was terrified of being nothing. My father worked in a factory for 40 years and died with nothing. My mother cleaned houses. He stopped, a bitter laugh escaping. Like you did. Like you had to do because I stole your uncle's future. I grew up watching my parents struggle, and I swore I would never be like them. I would never be poor, never be powerless, never be invisible. He slumped against the window. When those investors started pressuring me, when they said Mikhail's idealism would kill the company, I saw my one chance at escape slipping away. And I panicked. I told myself I was being pragmatic, that I was making hard but necessary decisions. But the truth? I was just a terrified boy from Manchester who couldn't imagine going back to being nobody. So you destroyed my uncle to avoid your fear, Elena said coldly. Yes. The word was simple, absolute. And I've paid for it every single day since. Not with money, money means nothing. With my humanity. I cut out my own heart the day I betrayed Mikhail, and I've been a walking corpse ever since. He returned to his desk and picked up the photograph of him and Mikhail. I went to his funeral, you know. I stayed in the back where no one would see me. I watched your mother cry. I watched you, this skinny 15-year-old girl with your uncle's eyes, place a chess piece on his coffin. A white knight. And I knew in that moment that I'd killed not just my best friend but the best version of myself. Elena remembered that day, the grief, the anger, the sense of cosmic injustice. That night was from his first chess set. The one his grandfather gave him. I know, Victor whispered. He told me about it. About how his grandfather taught him that knights were the soul of the game, the pieces that could leap over obstacles, that moved in unexpected ways, that embodied creativity and hope. His voice cracked. I took all of that from the world when I destroyed him. The unexpected truth. Elena pulled an envelope from her bag, the same envelope her mother had given her before she left for America. Before he died, my uncle wrote something. My mother only gave this to me when I told her I was coming here, that I was going to confront you. Victor's face went even paler. What does it say? Elena's hands shook as she unfolded the letter. It was in Russian, written in Mikhail's distinctive handwriting. She began to translate, her voice breaking. My dear Elena, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and you've found Victor. I know you well enough to know you're angry. You want justice, maybe even revenge. I understand, I felt that way too, for a long time. But I learned something in these final years, something I wish I'd understood sooner. She paused, wiping her eyes. Victor had frozen completely, barely breathing. Hatred is a prison worse than any Victor could have built for me. For 3 years, I let anger consume me. I stopped playing chess because it reminded me of him. I stopped dreaming because dreams were what he'd stolen. I was already dead, my heart just hadn't stopped yet. Victor made a sound like a wounded animal. But then you came to live with us, Elena. And you asked me to teach you chess. And when I started playing again, teaching you the game my grandfather taught me, I felt alive for the first time since leaving America. I realized that Victor hadn't stolen my creativity or my passion, I'd given them away to my hatred of him. Elena's voice was barely a whisper now. So I forgive him. Not because he deserves it, he doesn't. But because I refuse to die as a prisoner of what he did. I want you to understand something crucial, Victor didn't destroy me. I let myself be destroyed by my inability to forgive. Don't make the same mistake. She looked up at Victor, who had collapsed back into his chair, his shoulders shaking with sobs. Tell him this for me, I'm sorry I wasn't strong enough to forgive him while I lived. Tell him that the algorithm we created together, it was good work, and it was real, and it came from both of us. Tell him that hatred destroys the hater more than the hated. And tell him, Elena's voice broke completely. Tell him that I loved him like a brother, and that never stopped, even when I wished it would. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the sound of Victor's weeping. Elena stood there, her own tears flowing, holding the letter that had carried her uncle's final message across 15 years in an ocean. "He forgave me," Victor finally managed, his voice wrecked with emotion. "After everything I did, he forgave me." "He did," Elena said. "But he also wants me to tell you something else." She refolded the letter carefully. "That forgiveness doesn't erase consequences. It doesn't undo the past or absolve you of responsibility. It just means he chose not to let your betrayal poison the rest of his life." Victor nodded slowly, wiping his face with shaking hands. "What do you want from me, Elena? Tell me. Anything. Everything. I'll give you the company, my entire fortune. I'll make a public confession that destroys my reputation, whatever you need to find justice. Justice redefined." Elena walked to the window and looked out at the city, at the towers and bridges and the glittering bay beyond. From up here, the world looked orderly, comprehensible, like pieces on a chessboard. But she knew better now. Life wasn't chess. There were no simple victories, no clean checkmates. "I don't want your company or your fortune or your public humiliation," she said quietly. "What I want is for my uncle's name to mean something again. Not as a victim, but as the genius he was." She turned to face Victor. "The Mikhail Volkov Institute for Ethical Technology. We'll establish it with your resources, but I'll control it. We'll fund researchers and immigrants whose work has been stolen or ignored. We'll prioritize ethics over profit, humanity over shareholder returns, everything my uncle believed in." Victor was nodding before she finished. "Yes. Absolutely. Whatever you need. And you'll tell the truth," Elena continued, her voice harder now. "Not some sanitized press release. The real story, how you stole his work, manipulated his visa status, erased his contributions. The world needs to know that the foundation of Ashford Analytics wasn't built by one visionary billionaire, it was built by two brilliant immigrants, and one betrayed the other." "I will," Victor said. "I'll tell everything. My board will revolt, shareholders will sue, my reputation will be destroyed, but I'll tell the truth. You have my word." Elena studied him, this broken man who'd spent 15 years in a prison of his own making. And she thought about her uncle's words, "Hatred destroys the hater more than the hated." "There's one more thing," she said softly. "You're going to learn to forgive yourself." Victor looked up, confused. "What?" "My uncle's last years were poisoned by hatred, hatred of you, but also hatred of himself for being naive enough to trust you. He only found peace when he let that go." Elena moved closer to the desk. "You've spent 15 years punishing yourself, and it hasn't helped anyone. It didn't bring my uncle back. It didn't ease my family's suffering. It just created more pain." She placed her hand on the photograph of young Victor and Mikhail. "The man in this picture, your friend, my uncle, he would want you to do better. Not for your sake, but because the world needs people who've learned from their mistakes to make sure those mistakes aren't repeated." Victor stared at her in disbelief. "How can you possibly offer me forgiveness? After everything?" "I'm not offering forgiveness," Elena interrupted. "That's not mine to give, it was my uncle's, and he already gave it. What I'm offering is something different, the chance to honor his memory by becoming the person he believed you could be. The person you were before fear turned you into something else. The healing begins." 3 months later, on a crisp autumn morning, Elena stood in front of a new building in Cambridge, Massachusetts, just blocks from where her uncle had once worked in a cramped apartment, dreaming of changing the world. The sign above the entrance read, "The Mikhail Volkov Institute for Ethical Technology." The building itself was modest compared to the gleaming Ashford Tower, only 5 stories, with warm brick and large windows that flooded the interior with natural light. But inside, 30 researchers were already at work on projects that prioritized human welfare over profit margins. Beside Elena stood her mother, Nadia, who had arrived from Belarus the week before. And on Elena's other side stood Victor Ashford, who looked somehow smaller than he had 3 months ago, but also more real, more human. The press conference had happened 6 weeks earlier. Victor had told the complete truth, the manipulation, the betrayal, the stolen work. The fallout had been catastrophic for him personally. His board had forced him out as CEO. Multiple lawsuits had been filed. His name had been stripped from buildings and awards. But he'd also transferred controlling interest in Ashford Analytics to the Volkov Institute, ensuring that Mikhail's vision would finally be realized. The company would continue operating, but now under Elena's guidance, with a mission statement that prioritized ethics over earnings. "Your uncle would be proud," Nadia said softly in Russian, squeezing Elena's hand. "Yes," Elena agreed. "He would." Victor cleared his throat. "There's something I want to show you both." He pulled out his phone and displayed a photograph. "This arrived yesterday. It's from a professor in Minsk who heard about the institute. He's been teaching Mikhail's original papers, the ones I tried to bury. He says there's a whole generation of computer science students in Belarus who now consider Mikhail Volkov one of the fathers of ethical AI." Elena felt tears prick her eyes. Not tears of sadness this time, but of something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years: hope. "He's real again," she whispered. "His legacy, his dreams, they're real again." Victor's own eyes were damp. "Because of you. Because you were brave enough to keep your promise to him. Because you showed me that justice isn't always about punishment, sometimes it's about restoration." Nadia turned to Victor, and for the first time since they'd met, her expression held something other than cold politeness. "My brother used to say that chess teaches us that even when pieces are lost, the game can still be won. That sacrifice can lead to unexpected beauty." "He taught me that too," Victor said quietly. "I forgot it for a long time. But your daughter reminded me." Elena looked up at the building that bore her uncle's name, at the students and researchers moving through the bright windows, pursuing knowledge with ethics, using their brilliance to help rather than exploit. And she thought about the chess game that had started all of this, the fearless sacrifices, the beautiful combinations, the victory that had seemed impossible. "In chess," she said, "the game isn't over when the king falls. It's over when both players agree it's over. My uncle's story didn't end with his death, and yours didn't end with your betrayal. We get to decide what the ending is." Victor nodded slowly. "Then let's make it an ending he would have approved of. One where the pieces that were lost are honored, where the mistakes are acknowledged, and where the next generation gets to play a better game." As they walked together into the institute, past the bronze plaque that read in memory of Mikhail Volkov, visionary, teacher, friend, Elena felt something she hadn't experienced since her uncle's death, the sense that the world, despite all its cruelty and injustice, could still be made right. Not through revenge. Not through punishment. But through the harder, more courageous act of restoration. Her uncle had taught her to play chess like ballet, to create beauty from chaos. And now she'd learned his final lesson, that true victory isn't about defeating your opponent. It's about transforming the game into something neither player expected, something that honors what was lost while building something new. The ghost had been acknowledged. The debt had been paid. And in the space where hatred and guilt had lived for 15 years, something unexpected had grown instead. Healing. Hope. And the possibility of redemption.